All right, we're going to get started, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to Pain BC's Empowering Self-Management of Pain webinar series. I'm Michael Millman, Communications Director at Pain BC, and I'll be hosting the webinar today. A few technical points before we begin. You should be able to hear the presentation through your computer speakers. I've seen through the chat function that that it is working. If a couple of you could please chat me to let me know that you can still hear the audio, that would be great. Also, please use the chat box to submit any issues you may be experiencing to the host, me, Michael Millman. When the presentation is in full screen, you can access the chat function by hovering your mouse at the top middle of your screen and pressing chat. As for questions on the content, please save those up for the beginning of next session, as we're going to start a little early at 11:30 a.m. next week and deal with all of your questions. You can either submit them at the beginning of the show next week, or you can email them to me at communications@painbc.ca. Before I introduce Neil Pearson, I wanted to share a little bit about Pain BC. We are a non-profit made up of patients, healthcare providers, and others with a shared passion for reducing the burden of pain in BC. We aim to accomplish that mission through three pillars of pain reduction. The first is educating, promoting skill development, and building hope and confidence among people in pain and their families. An example of that work is our Facebook page, where we have a community of over 3,600 people in pain who are sharing resources, having research translated, and providing support to each other. Another example of that is this webinar today. The second pillar of pain reduction is providing healthcare practitioners with the tools and training they need to better assess and manage their patients' chronic pain. We hold an annual pain management conference, the topic of which this year is pain in the brain, and we're also working with the BCMA on a practice support program to help GPs and specialists better treat their patients' pain. The third pillar is facilitating innovation and improvement in the healthcare system. We're currently acting as advisors to the Fraser and Interior Regional Health Authorities on their plans for new regional pain programs, and are developing a pilot model for pain management in the North, working with the Prince George Division of Family Practice and Northern Health. So please check us out at www.painbc and like our Facebook page. And now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Neil Pearson. Neil is a physiotherapist, yoga therapist, and clinical assistant professor at the University of British Columbia. He works clinically in Penticton, BC, exclusively with people with complex pain conditions. Neil is an international educator, the founding chair of the Pain Science Division of the Canadian Physiotherapy Association, a board member of BC, and the recipient of the 2012 Canadian Pain Society's Excellence in Interprofessional Pain Education Award. His passion for physiotherapy, pain management, and for teaching pain science is matched by his efforts to integrate Western pain care and therapeutic yoga. To learn more about Neil, please visit lifeisnow.ca. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you very much, Michael.
So I'm just going to pass over presenter privileges to Neil. You should be able to now see Neil's beautiful face from Penticton, British Columbia. And take it away, Neil. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thanks for the great introduction, and of course thanks to Pain BC for inviting me to help out with this, these three talks. So hopefully on your screen at this point you're seeing a slide that says Empowering Self-Management of Pain. So over the next 3 weeks, what we want to do is provide you with more information about how this pain system works. So we want to start today talking about pain. So this big topic about pain, and then next week we're going to talk about what happens when pain persists. So we're going to talk more about persistent and chronic pain issues next week and how the system changes. Then, of course, what we want to use is all that information to figure out what can we do about self-management. So in the third week, we're going to be talking more about the things that we can do using this information to find a way to less pain, better ease of movement, and to try to improve our quality of life. So one of the first things that I like to start off with when I'm talking to people about how the pain system works is instead of actually talking about how the system works, but talk about how our experience around pain works. And I'm guessing that most of you have had a paper cut before. And a paper cut's a fascinating experience because here you've got something that hurts a lot, yet there's very little damage to the body with it. And it's contrary to this belief system that we have about how pain and tissue damage match up, and I want to make sure you understand it's contrary to what I learned in school. We definitely learned to pay a lot more attention to people who said their pain was a lot bigger, and that's contrary to this experience that we've all had. Most of you, I'm sure, have done something like stub your toe as well, where you stub your toe and you could be nauseated from that or see stars, and yet the next day you look at your foot and your foot seems to be okay. There's no cut, there's no bruise. So this idea that we need to start with is that some of the things that we've thought about pain, or maybe some of the things we haven't taken time to think about pain, aren't quite accurate, and sometimes that's the reason why it's hard for us to move forward. Let me see if I can explain a little bit more about it. So if we get down to the basics of pain, so why do we feel pain, or what's the purpose of pain? Typically the answer to this question that people will give is that pain's job is to tell us that there's something wrong inside the body, that there's some sort of damage being done to the body. That's true, but it's not exactly true. What we need to do is sort of get deeper than this and look at the purpose of pain. And really what it comes down to is the purpose of pain, we can sum it up in one word, and that one word is protection. So the job of the pain system is to protect you. You might say that the job of the system is to get you to stop doing what you're doing, but sometimes it actually doesn't stop you. Sometimes be more cautious or change your behavior. And of course, just like a yield sign on a road, you don't always have to pay attention to it, and sometimes you miss it. So that's the complexity of these protection systems. But really the key is that one of the jobs of, the job of the pain system is to protect you. Now your body has a lot of protection options. So one of the options, as we said, is to give you pain. So give you an unpleasant sensation. So if it's a sensation you don't like, then that's going to get you to attend to it and to change your behavior. But the body can protect you other ways. It can give you spasms. So if you've been in a car crash and your neck muscles are all tight for the next few weeks or a few days, the muscles are tight as a protective response as well. So the muscles are tight to try to stop you from moving. Now the body can also protect you by doing exactly the opposite with the muscles. It can make your muscles feel weak. So you've probably experienced this kind of thing if you smack your thumb with a hammer. Your thumb hurts, of course, but then if you try to use your hand, your whole hand is weak, and that's because your body is trying to, once again, stop you from using your hand or get you to change your behavior. Your body can protect you with other things. It can change your posture. You know, we all know that protective posture we tend to go into. Your body can protect you by creating strong emotions. So if your body wants you to change, or if something's happened in your body and the system's trying to protect you, it could cause fear, it could cause anxiety, it could cause anger. All of these things will help make you change your behavior, protect you. And it can also get you to change your breathing. I know it says stop breathing, but the idea, what I'm trying to point is that what it gets you to do is hold your breath. So you know that when something hurts, or when you think something's going to hurt, when you go to do it, we tend to hold our breath. And one of the problems that we have with all these protection options is that they feed right back into the pain system. So if you have pain and then your body makes you hold your breath, well, that tends to make more pain. If the body, if you have pain, the protection of pain, and then the muscles spasm, well, that gives you more pain. And each one of these things sort of feeds back, which is one of the troubles that we have with these systems when the pain persists. There is a group called the International Association for the Study of Pain, and this is a definition that they've come up with. That's sort of good to look at. It needs to be fixed a bit, but there's some good about this. They say pain is unpleasant, well, it needs to be to get you to change behavior. They say it's sensory and emotional experience. So the fascinating thing is that the nerves, the way they work in your body, there are actually two kinds of nerves that pick up potentially dangerous things happening in your body. And when those nerves send their information into the spinal cord and when it goes up to the brain, some of the information goes off to the sensory part of your brain and some goes off to the emotional part of your brain. So you really can't actually have a sensation of pain without some sort of experience, or sorry, some sort of emotion, which we've all have experienced. You know, if you think about getting up to head to the bathroom in the middle of the night and you stub your toe on something that's not supposed to be on the floor, at about the same time as you're feeling the pain, you're usually vocalizing an emotion about that thing on the floor or whoever left it there. Now, because pain is an experience is a big thing, and I've highlighted there, but we'll come back to that. They say pain is associated with actual tissue damage. That makes some sense. Potential tissue damage would be that if you pulled your finger back, the first pain that you feel when you pull your finger back isn't telling you that there's actually damage. It's telling you that if you keep on doing this, you're going to cause damage. So it's talking about potential tissue damage. And then they ended the description talking about how pain is described in terms of damage. The words we use around pain tend to suggest that there is damage in the body. So it's a cutting pain, or it's a ripping, or it's tearing, or it's electric, and all these words suggest there's damage. But this word experience we need to look at a little bit more, because pain and experience have a lot to do with each other. So experiences are something that can really, really impact our future experience. So previous experiences change the way we experience anything right today. And this can be really, really powerful. So our body can protect us based on protection we needed in the past. So a simple example would be the person who puts their hand on the hot stove, and so next time their hand gets anywhere near it, the automatic processes of the body typically protect the person more. But if you think of another example of this in terms of protection, would be you've probably heard a story of someone who's maybe had too much tequila or baby duck or lemon gin or something like that, and then for the rest of the person's life, if they try to taste it again, they'll actually feel sick. So the body is turning on protection responses because you needed that protection in the past. And the having too much alcohol or food poisoning, that sort of protection, it shows us how powerful these things can be. Because you could have an experience with alcohol like that, or an experience with a certain food where you have food poisoning, and this can last a long, long time and be really, really powerful. So powerful that in times people may say that, all I need to do is think about that food now, or all I need to do is, see a bottle of tequila, and that's enough to actually turn on the system. And if you're thinking about that, I know it's different from pain, but if this is protection mechanism turning on, imagine if you've got your protection mechanism on 24 hours a day, for weeks or months or years, how powerful this system can get. But the important thing to know about this, even though it's long-lasting and powerful, is that it's something that we can change. We have some capacity to influence and change the system, which is, of course, where we want to get to in the third talk. So to understand the pain system, we want to look at it as an alarm system, a system that can warn you when you've been damaged, and the system can warn you when you're approaching damage, like pulling your finger back. And the system can also warn you if you're in a situation similar to a time in the past when you've had pain or needed to be protected. So it's quite a complex system, a little bit more complex than most alarm systems that we consider. So through the next, today and through the next talks, you're going to see this slide every once in a while. And when you see this slide, what I'd like you to do is to actually do it. As you breathe in, say to yourself, breathing in, I am calm. And as you breathe out, say to yourself, breathing out, I smile. So it's an opportunity to just slow your breath down and see if you can find a little bit more relaxation in the body. And while you're doing it, see if you can think about the information that we've just talked about, is whether this relates. You can think of any way it relates to you or to other people you know. So I'm going to give you some examples when we pause here. Like one of the patients that I saw in Vancouver was a fellow who's a logger, and he'd come out to the west coast of BC to cut down the big trees. And when he was cutting down a big tree, a big part of the branch, dead branch up top of the tree fell down in and actually crushed him. So he ended up in ICU for quite a while as they were saving his life. And when he found that he could, when he finally got to the spot where he could stand up and walk again, what he found was that if he stood or he walked long enough, his legs would give out. And so the doctors thought that he must have pinched nerves from the injury. And so they went back and they had a look at the X-ray, and they saw that there were a couple of bones in his back had been broken in the accident, but they had healed well, and all the holes for the nerves coming out were okay. And so they're thinking, well, your legs are giving out, you must have pinched nerves, so we can't see it on the X-ray, so let's check further. So they did the CAT scan, and they did the MRI, and then they did a nerve conduction test, and then they even did a brain scan on this fellow, and they couldn't find anything going on with him. And what we started to realize was that here's a guy, he's a logger, and loggers have back pain. It's part of their culture. And he had been a logger for almost 4 decades. Over that period of time, he had gotten used to back pain. But now his body, because he's injured his back in this accident, and now he's standing up and he's putting weight there, and his body is sending signals up towards his brain, and it's trying to protect him. But he's so good at not paying attention to these signals, these protection signals that are coming from his body up to his brain, that he just carries on through them. And what we figured the problem was with this fellow was that because he wasn't listening to the protection mechanism that had to do with pain, his body needed to find another way to try to stop him or slow him down. And so what it was doing was making his legs feel weak. A little bit like, if you're not going to listen to that signal, then I'll find another way to stop you, is what we figured with this fellow. And it's quite a common thing that we actually were seeing in terms of pain management. So I hope that makes some sense. So let's carry on with a little bit more information. So we've been talking about the sophistication of this alarm system, or this pain system, but we need to know the sort of the nitty-gritty of how it works. So before we get into how it works, what I want to do is make sure you understand sort of how it doesn't work. We tend to consider the nerves like wires, but they are not as simple as that. The wires that we're talking about in terms of sending signals through your body, through your nerves, they don't look anything as simple as this. They actually look more like this kind of a picture. As you can tell, this is a living cell, and it's actually quite more complex than a simple wire going through your body. And I should let you know that the picture that I'm showing you here is actually a really quite, strangely enough, a very simplified picture of what a nerve cell looks inside your body. They're even more complex than this. Now I'm going to really take all the complexity away and get down and talk about the way the nerve cells work. So nerve cells are wiry kind of things, like the picture you're seeing in front of you, and then they're called neurons. So they've got this wire bit in the middle, and at the top of the picture there's a bulb that has chemicals in it, and I'll tell you about those in a couple minutes. But down at the bottom of the nerves, the thing that's circled in red there for you now, are the sensors. So every nerve cell in your body has sensors at one end, and they're going to detect certain things. So if that was a nerve cell in your eye, it would detect light, and if it was a nerve cell in your ears, it would be detecting vibration. And the pain neurons, or the nerves in your pain system, actually detect 3 other things, which I'll get to in a moment. But when this nerve does detect something, it's going to send messages up through this wiry bit. So those sensors down at the bottom, if they get excited enough, if they sense enough, what they'll do is they'll send this electrical message flying up to the other end of the nerve. It actually travels at way beyond 20 meters a second, which means it's a very, very fast signal. Now, one of the problems that we have with these nerves is that the nerve cells themselves are really, really small. So if there was one sitting in your hand, it would be so small that you couldn't even see it, which is part of the reason why it's only been in the more recent years that we've understood them. But if we can look at that nerve cell up close, if we can make it bigger so we could see it, what we'd actually see is that that black thing in the middle of your screen now, it looks like an envelope on its side. And this envelope is sending a danger message, because these nerves send danger signals. And they'll send danger signals when they detect certain things, or when they sense certain things, like mechanical force. So if you squeezed my hand too hard, or pulled my finger or my arm back too far, the nerves would get excited by that, and they'd send these danger messages up to the other end of the nerve. If you put something that was really hot on my body or really cold on my body, the nerves would detect that and tell me, hey, there's something dangerous going on here. And if you put certain chemicals in my body, so mostly the chemicals that happen around inflammation will get these nerves excited. So these nerves can get excited by any of these three things. But one of the important things we want to get is that the nerve doesn't actually send pain signals. It sends what we call danger signals. And when it sends these, as I said, it sends them super fast from one end of the nerve up to the other end. Now, if we could look at a close-up of the nerves, what we want to do is ask this question here is, when you sprain your ankle, when does the pain actually start? So what we want to make sure that with our understanding about the system is that the pain actually starts when the signal gets all the way up to your brain. So when the signal's in the nerve in your ankle and your leg, you don't have pain yet, and when the signal's in your spinal cord, you don't have pain yet. You actually don't have pain until you get up to your brain, as the signal gets up to your brain, and we'll explain a little bit about how that all works. So if you have a nerve here in your body, and then let's add in a nerve in the spinal cord, those two nerves have to communicate. So if this bottom nerve that we have on the screen here sends a message up from the bottom up to the end of that nerve in your spinal cord, it will release these chemicals into your spinal cord. When the chemicals come out, if enough of them come out, that next nerve in your spinal cord will get excited, and then it'll send a message up to the other end of it, release chemicals up into the brain, and then the message will get up into the brain. If we looked at this a little bit more closely, the bottom right here, you see the end of a nerve from the body, and then those little bundles of chemicals. So when the electrical message comes up to the end of that nerve, these bundles of chemicals get released. They cross over to the other side of this little gap to the nerve that's actually in the spinal cord. And those little black things you see there are a little bit like gates. So when these chemicals attach into that gate, the gate opens up a little bit, and charged particles will go inside that nerve. When enough charged particle is inside that nerve, it can send a message flying up to the other end of the nerve up to the brain. Now, as I said to you, it's complex, so it actually is a little bit more complex than I'm telling you. So the nerve at the bottom that has the red arrows on it, that's a nerve in your body. The blue nerve that's above it, that's a nerve in your spinal cord, and above that would be the brain. But you see the orange and the green nerve coming down. So it turns out for every nerve that's going up your spinal cord, there are also nerves that come down your spinal cord, and some of them send signals down your spinal cord, release chemicals into that same little gap in the spinal cord that get the nerves that are going up to get more excited. And then you have these other nerves, like the green side, where they send signals down through the spinal cord, release these other chemicals into the spinal cord that tend to block the signals going up. So if you get enough of that side, then you don't have as much pain. Whereas if the signals are coming up the orange side or coming down the orange side of the nerve, this actually will increase the pain that you're having more. And it's important to understand that this kind of a system is happening all the time. Your whole life, there are signals coming down your spinal cord trying to influence the signals that are coming up. Our brain really has the capacity to say, yes, that's really important information. I want to know everything about it. And to say, hey, look, I'm really busy right now. I don't have time to pay attention to the signals. So it actually blocks them way down to the spinal cord. So the really nice thing to know, though, is that the chemicals coming down on this green side, obviously it's not really green, but in the picture on the green side, these are really, really powerful chemicals that we can use to block signals. Things like endorphins and serotonin and dopamine, these really, really powerful pain-relieving and mood-elevating chemicals. So you can see the system is really, really complex, and that should make some sense. We tend to see the system like that wire in the wall kind of thing where it's really simple, but if it was that simple, chronic pain wouldn't be the problem that it is. We wouldn't have like 1 in 5 people having chronic pain and it being such a hard thing to change. So take another breath in, breathing in, I am calm, and as you breathe out, say to yourself, breathing out, I smile. And if your body's tight, feel, it's okay to like stretch it out a little bit or see if you can relax where it's tight. And I'm sure you can remember a time in your life when something's happened to your body and you found that you've had more pain than you expected or less pain than you expected. And And sometimes that's because of the way these signals are transferred through our system and how the signals are coming down and up the spinal cord. So if you can imagine, if you could imagine you were like inside your spinal cord, inside a nerve, what you'd actually see is if everything was transparent in there, you'd see that the nerve that you're in that's sending messages up to the brain, it's getting excited because there's signals coming up from the body, and the signals coming up through the nerves to the body are releasing these chemicals down below your feet. And these chemicals are crossing over to the nerve that you're in and attaching to the wall, and these little gates open up, and you see these charged particles coming in, and the more charged particles come into the nerve that you're standing in, the more it gets excited. And if it gets excited enough, it will send messages up to the brain. And if everything was transparent there, you could look out, you'd see that the nerve you're in is surrounded by about 40 other nerves, and those other nerves that surround you they're all coming down from the brain, and some of them are releasing those really powerful blocking chemicals into the gap below your feet, and some of them are releasing chemicals that will excite the nerve you're in even more. And what you'd notice is that how excited the nerve you're in becomes is a balance between these two sides. So what we want to do is in the face of ongoing pain, one of the things we want to consider is how do we shift that balance? It's not the solution. There's no one solution to helping with pain, but one way to change pain is to start to shift the balance of the signals that are traveling through our spinal cord. And we will talk more about that during the third session, a little bit more next week as well. So when these danger signals get up to the brain, they are a high priority because they're signals about something dangerous happening in your body. So, this thing that our body really wants to survive, so it sees danger signals as a high priority. So you can imagine that if this fellow you're seeing on your screen here, his job is making birdhouses, and he just got a call from his wife, and his wife has said, the pipes have frozen and they've burst and the house is flooding, and you got to come home right now. I need you. And he grabs his coat and heads towards the door, and his boss gets between him and the door and says, get back over there and finish that birdhouse or you're fired. So now he's back over there. He's so worried about his wife and his house and everything, and he smacks his thumb with his hammer because he's not quite paying as much attention as he normally does. Now, what I'd like to ask you is, do you think it's going to hurt more this time when he hits his thumb, or is it going to hurt less this time than usual? My guess is that some of you will be saying more and some of you will be saying less. And what I'd like to point out to you is that it could be either way. He might be so angry that nothing gets through. Or he could be so irritable that he just hits his thumb just a little bit, and the hitting his thumb feels really, really bad. I hope that makes sense. Because if you go from there on to the idea of that means that pain isn't just affected by what's happening in this guy's body. How much pain he experiences is related to the fact, well, it's caused by that he hit his thumb. But how much pain he's having has to do with a lot of other things, and that's the complexity of the pain. And when I say that, I want to make sure you understand is that the pain is there because something happened in his body. But the amount of pain that any of us experience is altered by other things than just that. And that's because the brain gets lots of inputs. So you have these danger inputs. Remember, the nerves are sending danger inputs up to the brain. Well, these danger inputs going up to the brain are going up with a whole lot of other inputs from all these internal systems of the body. I'm thinking that most of you will have heard of the fight-flight system and its nice partner, the rest-digest system. These are always sending inputs up to your brain through the automatic systems of the body. So your brain's getting information from there, and it's getting information from all the hormones in your body and from your immune system. The brain's getting information from all your other senses. It gets information from your thoughts, from your emotions. It looks at past experience and predictions of future stuff, and all of that comes in the brain all at the same time. And what your brain has to do, taking in all that information and all the information that's coming up through your spinal cord as well, through all your muscles and joints and tissues, everything from your spinal cord comes up. And then it sort of works around in the brain through all these different areas of your brain. And when it gets up there, what your brain has to do is process this. It has to take all that information, that huge amount of information, and it has to do this. It has to come up with a sensible story about what's happening. And it's a really, really key important thing, and we're going to come back to it again, but just have this idea that what the brain needs to do is come up with a sensible story based on all the information that's coming in, not just what's happening in the body. Similar to our fellow who's making the birdhouse, his brain needs to come up with a sensible story about what's happening. And for him, it may be that the story is that it doesn't hurt all that much, because if it hurts a lot, then he'll never get out of here. Or it could be that it hurts even more, just because he's so agitated. So we're saying here is that the brain is complex, which, once again, shouldn't be that much of a surprise. The scientists tell us that when we feel pain, between 200 and 400 areas of our brain get excited or get more active. When I hear that, I always think, I know a lot about the brain, but I know I can't name 200 parts of it. So the point being, a lot of your brain gets excited when you feel this pain. Your brain, as it says here, is about 10 billion neurons, so 10 billion nerve cells. So it's a huge number of nerve cells in our brain, and every one of them is connected to about 5,000 other nerve cells. Once again, saying this is a wildly complex thing, our brain, and that's part of the reason why we don't fully understand pain, is because our brain is so complex. Now, even with this complexity, there's one thing that we know about the nervous system. So it may be complex, but there's one thing we know for sure, and that's that the nervous system works on a priority basis. Now, this means that your nervous system will pay attention to whatever your nervous system thinks is really important. You've all experienced that before in life, where there's been something really important going on in your life. You're trying to pay attention to this to get this job done, but your brain keeps on drawing you back over to this other important thing, because that's just the way it functions. So when considering priorities, it helps us understand pain a little bit more. So what I'd like you to ask yourself is, have you ever injured your body and not felt pain? Now, a lot of times when I ask this question, people say, well, yeah, I've been working in the garden, or I've been working on a machine or on my car, or changing the tire on my car, and when I was done, I noticed that there was blood on my hand. So if there's blood on your hand, and it's from your skin being cut, well, the nerve cells in your body would have got excited, and they would have sent messages up to your spinal cord, and they would have tried to send the messages up to your brain. But if you didn't feel any pain, that means that your system was saying, I'm busy doing something else. And I'm sure all of you can understand how that can happen with small injuries, but this can also happen with big injuries. And probably the best example I can give is a fellow I worked with when I was in Northern Ontario. He was a French-Canadian fellow, and he was a first aid attendant at the mine just outside Sudbury. And his name wasn't Yves, but I always call him Yves because it's a good French-Canadian guy name. So anyway, Yves was on his way to work one night. It's 11 o'clock shift in the summer, and he was driving out of Sudbury out to the mine, and you're going along the highway, and he was driving a little faster than he should have because he was a little bit late, and as he came around a corner in the highway, there was a car in his lane coming at him. And they both tried to swerve, but not quite enough, and they sort of ripped right along beside each other, and his car bounced off the other one, down an embankment, hit a tree. He figured he lost consciousness really briefly when he hit his head inside the car, and when he came to, other than realizing that his car was like this, he realized there was a smell of gas right away when he came to. And so he started to scramble to get out of the car, and as he was scrambling to get out of the car, what happened was that the car started on fire. So really got worried that it was going to blow up, and he runs away from the car, trying to run back up towards the highway. And on the way up towards the highway, he said he tripped and he fell, and he sort of landed face first in the dirt, and found that a little bit curious that he landed in face first. But he said he rolls over on his back and sits up, and now he's got time to assess what's going on, because he's far enough away that he's feeling safe that the car's not going to blow up and impact him. So he sort of checks things out, and he realizes that he doesn't have his left arm from about here on his elbow down, or below his elbow down. Now, I worked with this guy because they put his arm back on. So I worked with him for many months after they had put his arm back on with physiotherapy. But it's a fascinating story, because here's this fellow, Yves, sitting in his car, or not sitting in his car, but he's in his car after the accident, and his arm is sending massive signals up towards his brain, but he doesn't get any pain. And so if you think about this priorities, you'd say, well, why not? Well, you might say, well, it's all shock, but I'll tell you later how it's not completely shock in this case. He doesn't have any pain. Why not? Because his system decided that if he knew about what was going on in his arm, he'd probably not get out of that burning car. So the bigger priority was survival. So hopefully that makes sort of some sense. But it's really fascinating. Here was this guy who got out of that side, hit the driver's side door of a car when he was missing part of his left arm without even knowing that the arm wasn't there. Anyway, I'll tell you the rest of the story because Eve loved to tell it, and it really sort of helps understand this better. So he's a first aid guy, so he takes his shirt off, and he uses his teeth and his other hand to make a tourniquet, and he puts it on. And he knows not to tie it too tight and to let it go every once in a while. He's a first aid guy, so he goes looking for his arm, and it's on the highway, and he picks it up and wraps it up in the rest of the shirt. And he's a first aid guy, so he goes looking for the other car, but the other guy's not there. He was a drunk driver who was caught later on that night. Anyway, he sits down the side of the road, and he says he's sitting there on the side of the road, and he's waiting for all the miners to come off shift. And by the way, if you're thinking, why doesn't he call anybody, this is 1984, so there's no cell phones then. So he says he's sitting there, and he starts to wonder if he should lay down in the anti-shock position, and then he realizes, then he starts to think, well, I should check myself out. I'm a first aid guy. And so as he checks himself out, he realizes, or comes to the conclusion that he's not in shock. And then he started to wonder if he was actually in shock, whether he'd be able to adequately assess whether he was in shock. And he's having this sort of funny thinking process going on. When the first car shows up, it's the Ontario Provincial Police car. The guy saw the fire from afar, and he came over to see what was going on. And he walks up to Eve, and it's sort of dark outside at this point. And he for whatever reason, he says to Eve, the first thing he says to him is, "Can I give you a hand?" And Eve, of course, pulls out his arm and shows it to the guy and says, "No, do you want one?" At which point the guy actually threw up on the side of the road, which was the part of the story that Eve loved to tell people. But the end of the story is really fascinating, too, because when Eve got to the hospital, he said that within about 2 minutes of getting into the doors, his pain went from 0 to anything, way beyond anything he thought was possible. And he actually went into shock at that point. So that his heart actually stopped, and they needed to resuscitate him. Which once again shows you this whole priority thing, right? It's like the system said, okay, you're safe now. I don't need to protect you anymore. So actually, now you can feel pain, and now I don't, you're safe. So I don't need to stop all this shock stuff from happening. Now, it doesn't always happen that way, but it just shows the sophistication of this system. And I hope that makes some sense. The other thing in terms of priorities to consider: have you ever felt pain without any danger messages coming from your body? So probably the best example of this is that you can actually see someone you love get hurt and feel pain. Or a guy can see another guy playing soccer and watch the guy take the soccer ball between the legs, and then the guy watching, his body acts as if it actually was injured itself. So here we've got this system that's that complex that you can have big damage to your body and not have much pain or any pain at all. And you can have no injury to your body at all, or no danger signals at all coming from your body, and you still have an experience of pain. So very complex, and that's important for us to understand. So take another few breaths. Breathing in, I am calm, and breathing out, I smile. And I'm sure you can all think of times in your life where you've seen someone you love get hurt and felt that sensation like there's something wrong inside your body. And I'm guessing you've all heard the stories of people who have had fairly significant injury to the body and not felt pain. So it shows, once again, the complexity of the system, and that the protection system itself is not simple at all. It's hard to predict it, actually. Let's go on to something a little bit different. I've put up on the screen here a picture of a box or a cube. What most of the time happens with this is, well, not most of the time, all the time, if you look at something like this, what happens is the information on the screen, it actually comes through light, and it excites nerves in your eyes. And when that information gets to your eyes, it relays back to your brain, just like danger signals do from your body. So it relays back to your brain, and somewhere back in your brain said, okay, here's a box or a cube, which is a little bit interesting even from the basics of what you're looking at is a bunch of black lines on a white background. But your automatic processing of your brain actually turned it into a three-dimensional object. Now, when you first looked at this, you would have seen it either looking like this, or you would have seen it looking like this. Now, If you didn't see it looking like that or like that, don't worry about it, because some people see it in other things. But these are the more common ones, to either see it at first with this face of the cube front or that face of the cube front. So whichever way you saw it first doesn't really matter. What I'd like you to do is to look at this one. And yes, I know there's a red dot in it, and don't worry about that for right now. But look at this picture and see if you can switch it. So when you first looked at it, your brain saw it one way. And so see if you can switch it so you actually see it the other way. So just to review for you, you might see it this way, and then see if you can switch it over to that way and see if you can switch it back and forth. Now, if you can switch this back and forth, what it means is that you can change the way your brain is perceiving this visual input, because this is visual input. And this visual input came in through your eyes, headed back to your brain, and what your brain did was automatically turned it into a cube for you. And then if you looked at it again and you were able to shift it to the other way, it's the very same information came in, went back to your brain just like before. But you shifted it over to being able to see it in a different way, which means that you can change how you perceive a visual input. Now, if you're having trouble with that, what I'd like you to do is to look at that red dot. And actually, even if you weren't having trouble with it, have a look at the red dot. And just try to focus on the red dot and don't focus on the rest of the cube. And just see what happens. Now, what some of you may experience when you look at that red dot is almost as if the whole cube shifts back and forth, or the corner of that red dot sort of pops back into the back corner, and then it pops into more of a front corner on this. And so if it's doing that for you, what it's showing you is that your brain all by itself, without you doing anything, also has the ability to look at signals that are coming in from more than one point of view, which is part of the reason why when sometimes we're sitting still, we're not doing anything, we haven't been really active, we're not really stressed, and the pain can shift all by itself. And we think that part of the explanation for that is that you're sitting there, you're thinking about something, your brain, your nervous systems are busy doing something, and then for whatever reason your system decides to have a look to see how that part of your body is doing. And when it looks at that part of your body, of course, that allows those signals to come through, and so you feel pain. The question when people hear that is always like, why would your brain do that? Why would it, if it's gotten to the point where it's sort of ignoring the signals, why would it pay attention to it? And we'd have to say it has to do with protection. It's a little bit like cutting your body and you sort of feel compelled to look under the bandage to see what's happening, or having a sore inside your mouth and your tongue just continuing to check it out, because that's just one of the ways the system works. But I want to come back to the idea of if you could change it one way or to the other. So when you first looked at this, your brain decided for you in an instant how you would see the cube. That was totally an automatic process. It's the same thing for pain. When you feel pain, when danger signals go from your body up to your brain, some process in the brain decides whether you have pain. Right, this happens in an instant. It happens totally below our conscious control. The danger signals go up there, and the brain either says, no, it's not dangerous, or no, you don't have to change your behavior. Like with Eve, the system said, no, I'm not going to let you know about this. Or the system says, yes, you get to have pain. So the slide you're looking at says your pain can worsen just because your nervous system decides by itself to pay closer attention to the danger signals. And as I said, this explains how pain can get worse when you're not moving more or when you're feeling stressed, just because the system decides to have a look to see what's going on. So if you could change how your brain decided to see that cube, that means that you changed how you perceived visual input. And what we need to ask from there is, if you can change how you decide to see the cube, can you change how your brain decides to perceive danger signals? It's a bit of an odd question at first. So you looked at that cube one way and you switched it to the other way. That means that you on purpose changed how your brain perceived visual input. And so if you can change how you perceive visual input, can you change how your brain perceives danger signals? Now, for most of you, there may be a little bit of a conflict that happens when you consider this question, because it makes sense, right? It makes rational sense or logical sense that if you could change the cube, you should be able to change how your brain perceives danger input. But you may be thinking, but no one's ever told me that before. Or you may be thinking that, but it can't be as easy as changing the cube. Now, it's not as easy as changing the cube because pain's way bigger priority. So danger and pain are bigger priorities than how you saw that cube. So it's going to be harder to change how your brain perceives danger signals. And if you're thinking, well, no one's ever told me this before, so how could it possibly be true? It's just one of those things that, unfortunately, we haven't had time. Most of us have not had a lot of time to think about what we think about pain and realize that there's a lot of things about pain that can be changed. And so I want to leave you with this idea that your nervous system actually has the power to change the way your nervous systems function. But I've shown you a picture here of a dimmer switch because I want to make sure that you totally understand this idea of, I don't know of anyone who's been able to change their pain or change their nervous systems like an on-off switch, like a light switch that goes on and off. When we talk about having the power to change the nervous systems, we're talking about the power to be able to change it a bit. And then if we can find the way to persist and do the right things, that we can influence it and change it a bit more and turn it down a bit more. So it's a hard thing to change, but it's definitely something that we see a lot of people who have ongoing pain have the capacity to change their system. So considering that, take a few more breaths in, and breathing in I am calm, and breathing out I smile. And see if you can bring a little more relaxation back to your body and some smoothness to your breath. One of the patients who really showed me the power of being able to change the pain system, and that's really how I've learned so much of this. Is I've learned about science, but I learned to listen to the people who had pain to hear the stories about how they were able to change things. So this woman that I was seeing, she was a care aide at a hospital, and loved doing her job and loved the people she worked with. And one day she was moving somebody from the bed to a chair, and there was a slip, and she felt this sort of tearing inside her shoulder. And it hurt a lot, but she was able to do her job even with the pain, and she loved the people she worked with and didn't want to not work. So she just kept on working, and she actually worked for about 9 months after this happened. By the end of the 9 months, she couldn't do it anymore. The pain was just getting really bad. Her shoulder was getting weak. So she put in a WCB claim at this time, not understanding that she was supposed to do it before. And unfortunately, they, of course, denied the claim, and so she had to fight it to prove that it really did happen 9 months before. And so she had to fight, and it took her months. I think it was maybe even a year that she had to fight with this. And by the time they got the fight done, and WCB said, yes, we'll give you this claim, and she came into the pain management center, the doctors there had a look at her shoulder and said, wow, it looks like you actually tore your rotator cuff. They did an MRI, and they showed that there was a torn rotator cuff. And the doctor said, hey, I can do the surgery. I can fix this. I know it's been a year, but I can fix this. And the surgery was a success, and then she successfully was able to go through a return-to-work program. And unfortunately, on her very first day back at work, she was at full duties at work. She was moving somebody again, and there was a slip, and she felt a tear again. And unfortunately, she wasn't believed when she told people this happened. They didn't believe that it happened. They took it as unfortunately, as an indication that she really didn't want to work. Anyway, so she had this tear again, and we didn't see her for even a couple years after that. And when she came in to see us, and we were talking about how the nervous system can change when pain persists and how excitable it can get, she said, I haven't told anybody this yet because they seem to think I'm lying, and I don't want them to think I'm crazy. But if I put my hand on my arm, just on the skin on my shoulder, it actually feels like it's on fire. She said, not like a burning pain, but actually like it's burning. It's on fire. It's so intense. And we were talking about how what's happening here is that when she puts her hand on her skin, is her system is concluding that something really dangerous is happening. She puts her hand on her skin. Signals are going through the normal skin nerves up towards the brain, but somewhere in there, the processing is getting muddled up or mixed up, and by the time the signal gets to her brain is saying something really dangerous is happening here. And so we were talking to her about the idea of how we could change pain, and so what she actually did was, concluding that it wasn't really dangerous. She said, when I put my hand on my shoulder, I know that's not a dangerous thing to do, but my system is telling me it is. So she said, she came back and she said, every single hour I've been putting my hand on my shoulder and asking myself, is this really dangerous? And she after about doing that for about a day, she came back and she said, that doesn't really work. What I need to do is not ask a question, but to make a statement. So she said, I'm putting my hand on my shoulder and saying, I hurt, she said, I hurt, but I'm okay. And then she came back the next day and said, saying, but I'm okay doesn't work. So it works to say, I hurt and I'm okay. So in her mind, and I think it makes sense, what she was doing was putting her hand on her body. Her body was saying, this is a highly dangerous thing to do. And she was saying, I hear it. I hear what you're telling me, but I know it's not true. A little bit like the cube, right? She looked at the cube. Her brain saw it this way, and she was saying, no, I want to see it this way. And what was really amazing with this woman is she was so convinced that this was one of the ways to do it that she was putting her hand on her shoulder every single hour and doing this. She had her watch beeping when she was awake. And within about 1 week of doing it, she was able to get so the pain was far less intense. She said it was burning pain now, not a feeling like it was burning. And by the time she finished with the treatment we were working with her on, 5 or 6 weeks down the road, she said, if you put your hand on my shoulder now, my system isn't telling me it's dangerous at all. She said, it still feels funny, but it's not a pain anymore. So to me, this is an indication of how the automatic processes of her body were starting to give her sort of faulty information, and we're coming to a conclusion that it was really dangerous. And what she was able to do with this particular sensation is to say, that it's not so dangerous as you're telling me. Now, if any of you hearing that story are thinking, well, she knew that wasn't dangerous, that's exactly a key point of this, is for us to be able to use a strategy like this, what we need to do is know that the activity we're doing is not a dangerous thing for our body. Because if you're thinking it actually is dangerous, there's no way for the nervous system to shift, right? Because that would be a priority issue. But we will talk more in the third session about how we can use that kind of thing, but you can play with it a bit. So I see we're sort of getting towards the end of the time here, so I want to see if I can summarize this a bit. So the pain system in our body is an alarm system. It's a sophisticated, complex alarm system that follows a bit of different rules than what we normally think, but it follows the rules that we've experienced. And the protective alarms that we experience could be pain, or they could be muscle spasm, they could be weakness. There's so many different things that they could be. And one of the things that we need to understand is that the pain feeds into the spasm, and the spasm feeds into the pain, and the weakness feeds into the pain, and the posture can feed into the pain. And so one of the ways that we have the option of being able to change the protective alarms is to try to intervene in some of those little vicious cycles that go on. The third point here, it says that danger signals heading to your brain are changed along the way, all the time. So what we used to think back in the 1600s was that something happens to the body, and just like the wire in the wall, whatever signal happens, starts at the beginning, gets to the other end of it. But what we know now is that when danger signals go through the nerves, by the time they get up to the brain, to the other end of the system, they're really, really changed. And maybe the example of this would be, if you turn a light switch on and off, well, the signal has to go to a junction box and then to the light. And the signal that goes to the junction box and the signal that goes to the light, it's the same all the way through. It's not modified that much at all. Whereas if you thought about the way the pain system works, it's a little bit like having maybe about 10 people sitting in a circle, and it's that telephone game where one person gives the next person a message, and then they have to pass it on to the next person and pass it on to the next person. So by the time the signal gets, or the message gets to the end, it has been changed. And your nervous system is even more complex than that, because if I'm in that chain of people and I'm telling the next person a story, it turns out that there's actually, in the nervous system, there's a whole bunch of other people there at the very same time telling the next person a bit of a different story. And so the next person in the chain can't just listen to me. What they have to do is come up with a sensible story about what's happening based on what I'm saying and what all these other people are saying. And so that's the complexity of the system and why signals do get modified. So that's why you can have an injury to your body and not have any pain, and that's why you can have a small injury and have a big pain, and why you can have a big injury and have a small pain. And the last point I want to leave you with is this idea that our own nervous systems, the nervous systems within our body that we have some influence over and can learn to have more influence over with practice, those things themselves can actually change the way we feel pain, change our experience of pain, how much pain we have and how much it hurts when we move. It's absolutely not an easy thing to do. And what we need to do is when we come back next time, we'll answer some questions about what's going on here, but we'll get into, if this is how the system works, how does the system change when pain persists? Because it does change when pain sticks around. The system actually does make some changes, and we need to understand those before we can really jump into what are we supposed to do to try to change this around. So as I mentioned, we don't have time for questions today. If you do have any questions right now that are like on your mind right now, write them on down. And what we'll be doing is meeting, as Michael will review with you, we'll be meeting next time at 11:30 instead of 12, so next Wednesday. And we'll start with questions for about half an hour and then get into more information about how the system works. So I'm hoping that does make some sense. And one thing before Michael takes it back, I wanted to mention to you this idea is that part of what we want by doing these is to get your feedback. We want to make this process even better. So we will be having opportunity for you to provide feedback to us about what made sense and what didn't make sense as we were going through this. So I'm going to pass back on over to Michael. So Michael, I think we're back over to you now.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Neil. It was great that you took the time to share your very, very valuable insights today on empowering self-management of pain, and we really appreciate you spending the time with us today.
You're welcome.
To all our attendees, thank you so much for joining us. As the slide that you're now seeing shows, we're going to reconvene next week at 11:30. And today's presentation was recorded and will be posted on our Facebook page and website within a week. For all of you who've registered, we will email you a hyperlink to the recording as soon as it's available, which should be within the week. As for questions on the content, as Neil mentioned, save those up for your questions on part 1 for next week at 11:30. You can either submit your questions at the beginning of the webinar using the chat or Q&A functions, or feel free to email them to me at communications with an S, at painbc.ca. So I also wanted to apologize to those who had trouble with the password. It seems like the password may have changed from the beginning, from the first message you received to the last message you received. The password going forward will be ESMP, which is an acronym for Empowering Self-Management of Pain, ESMP. So we'll see you all next week for part 2, and may tomorrow be a day free from pain for all of us. Goodbye.